The morning started like any other for Commander Sarah Chen at the Deep Space Communications Center on Luna Base. She sat at her desk with a cup of coffee, watching the green lights on her monitor that showed all human colonies were checking in normally. 237 colonies spread across the galaxy, each one sending their daily reports about crop yields, population numbers, and trade agreements with alien species. New Eden was always one of the first to report. The agricultural colony sat on the edge of human space, where the soil was rich and the growing seasons long. 2.3 million people called it home, living in cities that looked like gardens and farms that stretched to the horizon. Sarah had visited once during her academy days. She remembered children playing in fields of golden wheat while their parents worked alongside friendly alien traders from 3 different species. The clock showed 800 hours. New Eden should have sent their report by now. Sarah frowned and checked her systems again. Every other colony showed green, but New Eden remained dark. She tried sending a direct communication request. The signal traveled through subspace, crossing hundreds of light years in seconds, but no answer came back. Probably just a transmitter problem, she told herself. These things happen sometimes. Solar storms could damage equipment, or maybe someone accidentally broke something important. She made a note to send a repair ship if they didn't hear anything by tomorrow, but deep in her stomach something felt wrong. Hours passed. Other colonies continued their regular check-ins. Trade ships reported normal business. Everything seemed fine except for that one dark spot where New Eden should be. Sarah tried calling them every 30 minutes, but each attempt met only silence. By afternoon, she called her supervisor. Captain Rodriguez came to look at the screens, his weathered face showing concern. "How long since their last transmission?" he asked. 18 hours and counting, sir. They never miss a check-in. Could be equipment failure. Or maybe they're dealing with some emergency that's keeping them busy." But Sarah could see in his eyes that he was worried too. New Eden wasn't just any colony. It was one of their most successful settlements, a shining example of human expansion into the galaxy. The kind of place that made other species respect humanity as partners rather than just newcomers. "I want to send a probe," Rodriguez said finally. "Something fast that can get there and send back pictures." The probe launched 6 hours later. It would take 2 days to reach New Eden, even traveling faster than any manned ship could go. Sarah barely slept during those 2 days, checking her screens every few hours and hoping to see that familiar green light appear. When the probe finally arrived at New Eden's star system, the first pictures it sent back made Sarah's coffee mug slip from her hands and shatter on the floor. Where New Eden should have been, there was only a ball of cooling rock. The planet's surface glowed red-hot like metal fresh from a forge. The oceans had boiled away. The atmosphere was gone. Nothing lived there anymore. Nothing could live there anymore. The probe sent more pictures as it moved closer. Debris floated in space around the dead world. Pieces of buildings, twisted metal from vehicles, and chunks of what used to be spacecraft. Sarah recognized some of the wreckage from the colony's small defense ships, but they were melted and broken like toys stepped on by a giant. Captain Rodriguez stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder as they watched the horror unfold on the screens. Other officers gathered around, their faces pale and shocked. Someone was crying. Sarah realized it was herself. "Who did this?" she whispered. The probe had instruments that could analyze the weapon signatures left in space. The readings came back clear and undeniable. Energy weapons with a specific frequency pattern. Particle beams with a particular isotope signature. Sarah had seen these patterns in intelligence reports before. "The Kethvar," Rodriguez said, his voice hard as steel. "It's their weapons. No doubt about it." The Kethvar hegemony was one of the older species in this part of the galaxy, tall reptilian beings who ruled over dozens of worlds and considered themselves superior to younger races like humanity. They had been expanding their territory aggressively for the past century, always looking for new planets to add to their empire. But they had signed treaties. There were laws. The Galactic Council was supposed to prevent this kind of thing from happening. "Sir?" Sarah said, her voice shaking. "We need to contact Earth immediately, and the Galactic Council. This is genocide." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Send everything we have to Earth Command. Every picture, every sensor reading, every piece of evidence." "And Sarah?" He looked at her with eyes that suddenly seemed much older. "Market Priority Alpha. Use the emergency channels." The message reached Earth in 4 hours. Within minutes of its arrival, every major government leader was in emergency session. The president of the Earth Alliance stood before the Global Assembly with tears in her eyes as she showed the images from New Eden. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "we have just witnessed the complete destruction of one of our colonies. 2.3 million human lives were ended in a single day. Men, women, and children who wanted nothing more than to build homes and grow food on a distant world. The chamber was silent as death. We have proof that this atrocity was committed by the HFY hegemony. They glassed an entire planet. They murdered every living thing on New Eden for no reason, except that they wanted the world for themselves. Emergency communications went out to every human colony and ship. The news spread through human space like wildfire. On Earth, crowds gathered in the streets, their faces showing a mixture of grief and rage that hadn't been seen since the ancient world wars. Within hours, the Galactic Council met in emergency session. Representatives from dozens of alien species gathered in their grand chamber on neutral ground, speaking in hushed tones about the tragedy at New Eden. The human ambassador presented the evidence with a calm voice that hid the fury burning inside him. The HFY representative, a tall being with scales like armor and eyes like yellow flames, showed no emotion as he listened to the accusations. When his turn came to speak, he stood slowly and addressed the council with arrogance. "The world in question was in disputed territory," he said. "The humans had no legal claim to it. We were simply reclaiming what was rightfully ours." The human ambassador's face went white. "You murdered 2.3 million innocent people. We cleared an illegal settlement from our territory. The humans were warned to leave. They chose to stay." Several alien representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The council leader, an ancient being whose species had seen thousands of years of galactic history, called for order. "The council will investigate this matter thoroughly," the leader announced. "If wrongdoing is found, appropriate sanctions will be considered. Sanctions, not justice, not punishment, just economic penalties that the HFY could easily ignore." The human ambassador stood slowly. "And how long will this investigation take?" "Such matters require careful study. Perhaps 6 months, maybe a year." "A year." The ambassador's voice was deadly quiet. "A year to decide whether the murder of 2.3 million humans deserves a response." He gathered his papers and walked toward the exit. At the door, he turned back to address the council one final time. "Earth will remember who stood with us today, and who did not." Back on Earth, President Chen stood in the secure bunker deep beneath the Capitol building. Around her gathered the military leaders, intelligence chiefs, and government officials who would decide humanity's response. "The Council has failed us," she said simply. "We are alone in this." General Harrison, the old soldier who commanded Earth's military forces, stepped forward. "Madam President, I recommend we activate Protocol 7. Protocol 7. Total war authorization. The emergency powers that had been written into law but never used. The protocol that would transform the entire human civilization into a weapon of war." The president looked around the room at the grim faces staring back at her. "All in favor?" Every hand rose without hesitation. Protocol 7 is now in effect. God help us all. The changes began within hours of Protocol 7's activation. Across 300 human worlds, factory sirens wailed as production lines shut down and retooled for war. Civilian shipyards that had been building cargo haulers and colony vessels received new blueprints. Instead of peaceful ships designed to carry families to new homes, they would now build instruments of destruction. Admiral Marcus Steele stood on the observation deck of the Mars naval yards, watching as thousands of workers swarmed over the construction bays like ants. He had been pulled from retirement just 12 hours ago, called back to service by a direct order from Earth Command. At 70 years old, he was one of the few humans who remembered real war. The border wars had ended 30 years ago, fought against raiders and pirates on the edge of human space. Steele had been a young captain then, commanding a destroyer in battles that most people had forgotten. Those conflicts taught humanity hard lessons about space combat, lessons that the rest of the galaxy had never learned. "Sir," his aide said, approaching with a tablet full of reports. "The latest production numbers." Steele took the tablet and studied the figures. Even he was amazed by what humanity could accomplish when fully mobilized. In just 1 week, the production rate for military vessels had increased by 3,000%. Civilian factories converted their assembly lines overnight. Mining operations on 100 worlds doubled their output to feed the hungry war machine. "How many ships can we build per week at current capacity?" Steele asked. "At full production, sir? Approximately 8,000 vessels per week across all yards." That's everything from destroyers to dreadnoughts. 8,000 ships per week. The entire Kethvar Navy consisted of maybe 12,000 vessels total. Humanity was building more ships in a single week than most species owned in their entire fleets. But it wasn't just about numbers. Steele had spent the last week reviewing intelligence reports about alien military technology. The Kethvar used energy weapons almost exclusively, just like most older species. They built their ships to withstand laser fire and particle beams. Their armor and shields were designed around threats they understood. They had never faced human weapons. Humanity had developed kinetic weaponry during the border wars, railguns that fired solid, projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed, fusion torpedoes that could crack a planet's crust, missile swarms that overwhelmed point defense systems through sheer numbers, weapons that the galaxy's older species considered primitive and barbaric. They were about to learn why those weapons were so effective. Admiral, another aide approached. We have a priority message from Earth Command. The hologram that appeared showed President Chen, but she looked older than she had just days ago. The weight of command during wartime was already taking its toll. Marcus, she said, using his first name as they had known each other for decades. I need to know how long until we're ready. 6 months for full deployment, Madam President. We'll have 500,000 combat vessels ready for action, supported by another 100,000 logistics ships. Even through the hologram, Steele could see Chen's eyes widen. 500,000? Marcus, are you certain those numbers are correct? Yes, ma'am. Our industrial capacity far exceeds what most species believe possible. They think like small populations with limited resources. They don't understand what 200 billion angry humans can accomplish when working together. 200 billion. The total human population spread across 300 worlds. Most alien species numbered their populations in the millions or low billions. Even the mighty Kethvar hegemony had only about 50 billion citizens across all their worlds. But humanity had grown fast during their expansion into space. Large families were encouraged to populate new colonies. Medical advances kept people healthy and productive well into their hundreds. Immigration from Earth to the colonies had been massive, and each generation born in space had more children than the last. Now all those numbers would be turned toward war. What about personnel? Chen asked. Volunteering exceeded our capacity to train them, ma'am. We've had to turn people away. Apparently, the destruction of New Eden affected people more deeply than we anticipated. That was putting it mildly. The images from New Eden had been broadcast across all human worlds, and the reaction was unlike anything in recorded history. Recruitment centers were overwhelmed by volunteers. Some were crying as they signed their enlistment papers. Others were coldly angry, with expressions that reminded Steele of his own face when he looked in mirrors these days. The attack on New Eden had done something to humanity that the Kethvar probably didn't understand. It had unified the species in a way that nothing else could have. Political differences were set aside. Economic competition was forgotten. Religious and cultural divisions disappeared overnight. All of humanity now had a single purpose: make the ones responsible pay for what they had done. Sir, his communications officer called from across the command center. We're receiving reports from our scouts in Kethvar space. Steele walked over to the communication station, where intelligence reports scrolled across multiple screens. Human spy ships disguised as cargo vessels had been monitoring Kethvar military movements since the attack. What are they doing? Continuing their expansion, sir. They've attacked 2 more systems since New Eden. Not human colonies, but settlements belonging to the Veltar Collective. Same pattern. Complete planetary bombardment followed by occupation. Steele felt his jaw tighten. The Kethvar weren't just expanding into human territory. They were on a campaign of conquest across this entire region of space, using terror and genocide as their primary weapons. New Eden had just been the first human world in their path. Any response from the Galactic Council? The usual, sir. Diplomatic protests and economic sanctions that the Kethvar are ignoring completely. Of course they were ignoring sanctions. When a species was strong enough to glass planets and steal entire star systems, what did they care about trade restrictions? The Galactic Council was dominated by older species who had grown comfortable with peace. They preferred talking to fighting, negotiation to action. They were about to learn that humanity preferred results to discussion. Steele returned to the observation deck, where he could see the construction work continuing around the clock. Massive dreadnoughts took shape in the zero-gravity assembly bays, their hulls bristling with weapons that could reduce mountains to dust. Smaller ships, destroyers, cruisers, and frigates, were built in specialized facilities designed for mass production. But it wasn't just ships. Humanity was building weapons, armor, and equipment at a rate that defied belief. Automated factories worked without stopping, guided by artificial intelligence systems that could optimize production beyond anything biological minds could achieve. The rest of the galaxy still used traditional manufacturing methods, skilled craftsmen building ships one at a time, with careful attention to detail and artistic beauty. Their vessels were works of art that took years to complete. Human ships were built like bullets, simple, effective, and produced by the millions. Captain Elena Rodriguez arrived at the Mars Naval Yards 3 days later, fresh from the academy where she had been training new officers in combat tactics. She was one of Steele's most trusted commanders, a veteran of the border wars who understood both space combat and human nature. "Elena," Steele said as they met in his office, "I have a ship for you." He led her to Docking Bay 7 where her new command waited. The vessel was larger than any warship humanity had ever built, stretching nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull was dark gray metal covered with sensor arrays and weapon ports. "Vengeance-class battleship," Steele explained. "The first of her kind. We've built her specifically to fight the Kethvar." Rodriguez walked around the ship, studying its design with professional interest. "How many of these are we building?" 50,000. Along with 100,000 heavy cruisers, 200,000 destroyers, and 150,000 support vessels. Jesus. She stopped walking and stared at him. "Marcus, we're not just building a fleet. We're building an armada that could conquer half the galaxy." "I know." Steele's voice was quiet. "The question is, what do we do with all that power when the war is over?" Before Rodriguez could answer, another aide approached with urgent news. "Sir, we just received word from our embassy on the neutral world of Sanctuary. The Galactic Council has completed their investigation of the New Eden incident, and they've imposed economic sanctions on the Kethvar hegemony. Trade restrictions that will remain in effect for 10 years, assuming compliance with Council regulations." Steele and Rodriguez looked at each other. 10 years of reduced trade as punishment for genocide. It was less than meaningless. "Send a message to Earth Command," Steele said. "Tell them that humanity declines to recognize the Council's authority in this matter. We will handle the situation ourselves." As his aide hurried away to send the message, Steele turned back to Rodriguez. "How long do you need to shake down your new ship?" 2 weeks to run her through trials. Another week to train the crew on her systems. You have 10 days total. After that, we begin deployment to forward positions." Rodriguez nodded. "Understood, sir. May I ask what our rules of engagement will be?" Steele was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the construction yard 6 months after New Eden turned to glass. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the HFS Retribution and watched the most incredible sight in galactic history unfold before her. Stretching in every direction farther than sensors could reach, 500,000 human warships hung in perfect formation. The fleet was so large that it had to be organized into 7 separate battle groups, each one bigger than the combined navies of most alien civilizations. Rodriguez commanded Battle Group 7, which consisted of 60,000 ships, ranging from nimble destroyers to massive dreadnoughts that could crack moons in half. "Status report," she ordered. "All ships report ready for combat operations," her tactical officer announced. "Weapon systems armed, shield generators at full power, and jump drives charged for immediate transit." Rodriguez nodded, studying the tactical display that showed her portion of the fleet. The Retribution was one of the new Vengeance-class battleships, purpose-built to fight the Kethvar. At 2 kilometers long and armed with enough firepower to level a continent, it represented everything humanity had learned about warfare concentrated into a single vessel. But it wasn't just the size or weapons that made human ships dangerous. It was how they were built. Where alien species crafted their vessels like works of art, humans had engineered theirs like tools. Every system was designed for maximum efficiency and ease of repair. Crews could swap out damaged components in minutes rather than hours. Ammunition was standardized across all weapon types. Fuel systems were compatible between different ship classes. Most importantly, human ships were built to be expendable. Their crews were trained to sacrifice their vessels if necessary to complete the mission. This was a concept that horrified most alien species, who viewed their beautiful starships as irreplaceable treasures. The Kethvar were about to learn why that attitude was a weakness. "Captain," the communications officer called, "we're receiving a transmission from Admiral Steele." The main screen flickered to life. showing Steele's weathered face from his flagship, the HFS Vengeance. Behind him, Rodriguez could see the bustling activity of the fleet's command center, where hundreds of officers coordinated the movement of 500,000 ships, all battle group commanders. Steele's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Final mission briefing begins now. The screen split to show all 7 battle group commanders. Rodriguez recognized most of them, veterans of the border wars who had been pulled from retirement or promoted rapidly to handle humanity's largest military operation ever attempted. Intelligence update, Steele continued. The Kethvar now control 47 star systems, with a total military strength estimated at 15,000 combat vessels. They have continued their expansion, destroying 3 more colonies in the past month. None were human settlements, but that changes nothing. Rodriguez felt her jaw tighten. The Kethvar had learned nothing from their destruction of New Eden. They continued using genocide as a tool of conquest, apparently confident that no one could stop them. They were wrong. Our objective is simple, Steele said. Complete destruction of the Kethvar hegemony as a military and political entity. We will accomplish this through simultaneous attacks on 17 of their core systems, including their homeworld. 17 systems at once. Rodriguez had to admire the scope of the operation. Most species would attack one system at a time, allowing their enemies to regroup and respond. Humanity was going to hit so many targets simultaneously that the Kethvar couldn't possibly defend them all. Each battle group will take responsibility for 2 to 3 systems, Steele continued. You have complete tactical freedom in how you accomplish your objectives, but remember, we are not here for conquest. We are here for justice. The screen switched to show intelligence reports about Kethvar military capabilities. Their ships were built around energy weapons, powerful lasers and particle beams that could punch through most armor. Their shields were designed to absorb and deflect similar attacks. Their tactics emphasized long-range engagements where their superior energy weapons could destroy enemies before taking return fire. Was a perfectly reasonable strategy for fighting other alien species. It was completely useless against humanity. Human ships carried kinetic weapons that didn't care about energy shields. Railguns fired solid projectiles at relativistic speeds, hitting with the force of nuclear weapons. Fusion torpedoes could crack ship hulls like eggs, and if those failed, human vessels carried something no other species used in space combat: nuclear missiles. The aliens considered nuclear weapons barbaric and primitive. They preferred clean energy weapons that left no radiation or debris. They built their defenses accordingly, never imagining that anyone would be crazy enough to use fusion bombs in ship-to-ship combat. One more thing, Steele said, his voice growing harder. The Galactic Council has issued a formal request that we limit our response to the Kethvar. They are concerned about regional stability and want us to avoid excessive force. Several of the battle group commanders made disgusted sounds. The Council had done nothing while the Kethvar murdered millions of innocent people. But now they were worried about humanity using too much force to stop them. Here is my response to the Galactic Council, Steele continued. We will use exactly as much force as necessary to ensure that no species ever again believes they can genocide human civilians without consequences. If the Council considers that excessive, they are welcome to file a formal complaint. Rodriguez smiled grimly. She had served under Steele during the border wars, and knew he had little patience for politics or diplomacy. He was a soldier who believed in protecting humanity's interests, regardless of what alien species thought about his methods. Final equipment check, Steele ordered. All battle groups report readiness status. One by one, the battle group commanders reported in. Every ship was armed and ready. Every crew was trained and eager for combat. The largest military force in galactic history was prepared to move. Battle Group 7 reports full readiness, Rodriguez announced when her turn came. All ships armed and operational. Crews at combat stations. She had spent the last month putting her forces through intensive training exercises. Her captains knew their jobs, her crews knew their ships, and everyone understood what was at stake. The attack on New Eden had affected every human in the fleet personally. Many had friends or family who died when the planet was destroyed. This wasn't just military duty. It was personal. Admiral, the fleet intelligence officer announced, we're detecting increased Kethvar military activity in their border regions. It appears they're consolidating forces. Too little, too late, Steele replied. They had 6 months to prepare for our response. If they're just starting to take defensive measures now, They clearly didn't understand what they were dealing with. The truth was that most alien species couldn't comprehend humanity's industrial capacity. They thought in terms of dozens or hundreds of ships, built over years or decades by traditional methods. The idea that one species could construct 500,000 warships in 6 months was beyond their understanding. Even the Galactic Council, with access to intelligence reports about human production capabilities, seemed to think the numbers were exaggerated or impossible. They kept sending diplomatic messages asking for humanity to reconsider their response, apparently believing that economic sanctions and stern warnings would satisfy human anger over the genocide. They were about to learn how wrong they were. All battle groups, Steele announced, prepare for jump to combat zones. Mission begins in 30 minutes. Rodriguez turned to her bridge crew. You heard the Admiral. All ships prepare for combat jump. Navigation, confirm coordinates for our target systems. Coordinates confirmed, Captain. 3 systems assigned to Battle Group 7. Kethvar military strongholds at Drakmor, Selvek, and Thane 7th. Weapon status. All weapon systems armed and ready. Kinetic batteries loaded with armor-piercing rounds. Fusion torpedoes armed and targeted. Nuclear missile batteries ready for deployment. Shield status. All vessels report shields at maximum power. Point defense systems online and ready. Rodriguez nodded, feeling the familiar calm that came before combat. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, running final checks on systems that could mean the difference between life and death in the coming battle. Captain, her tactical officer said, we're receiving status reports from the other battle groups. Everyone is ready. On the main screen, she could see portions of the other battle groups preparing for their own jumps. The sight was awesome and terrible. Hundreds of thousands of warships about to unleash destruction on a scale the galaxy had never seen. All battle groups. Steele's voice came over the communication system. This is Admiral Steele. 6 months ago, the Kethvar murdered 2.3 million human civilians in an act of unprovoked genocide. Today we ensure that such an atrocity never happens again. Rodriguez felt a chill run down her spine. Around her, the bridge crew stood straighter, their faces showing the same mixture of grief and determination that had driven humanity to build this massive fleet. Jump drive charging, the navigation officer announced. 30 seconds to jump. All ships, Rodriguez broadcast to her battle group. The Kethvar defense fleet at Drakmor system detected the incoming human ships 3 minutes before they arrived. Admiral Zektar, commanding from his flagship Burning Talon, stared at his sensors in disbelief as the readings showed impossible numbers. Scan again, he ordered his sensor operator. These readings cannot be correct. Sir, sensors confirm. Multiple contacts incoming. Estimate 60,000 enemy vessels. Zektar's scaled hands gripped his command chair. His entire defense fleet consisted of 800 ships, considered one of the strongest forces in Kethvar space. The humans were bringing 75 times that number. Impossible, he hissed. No species has that many ships. The scanners are malfunctioning. But deep down, he knew the truth. The humans had been building for 6 months while the hegemony ignored their threats. Now those threats were becoming reality. Space rippled with energy as 60,000 human warships materialized in perfect formation. Captain Rodriguez's Battle Group 7 had arrived at their first target, and the sight that greeted them filled her with savage satisfaction. Tactical analysis, she ordered. Enemy fleet consists of approximately 800 vessels, mostly heavy cruisers and battleships. They're moving to intercept us, but their formation suggests they expected a much smaller force. Rodriguez studied the tactical display. The Kethvar ships were spreading out, trying to use their superior range and energy weapons to engage the humans before they could close to kinetic range. It was exactly what human intelligence had predicted they would do. It was also exactly the wrong strategy. All ships, Rodriguez broadcast to her battle group, execute Battle Plan Alpha, kinetic bombardment range, maximum firepower. The human fleet didn't try to close with the enemy. Instead, they opened fire at a distance of 2 million kilometers with weapons the Kethvar had never faced before. Railgun projectiles, accelerated to 10% of light speed, crossed the space between the fleets in seconds. The Kethvar energy shields, designed to deflect lasers and particle beams, offered no protection against solid matter traveling at relativistic speeds. The first volley from Battle Group 7 fired 600,000 kinetic rounds. Simultaneously, Admiral Zektar watched in horror as his flagship screens lit up with impact warnings. Solid projectiles slammed into his ships with the force of nuclear weapons, punching through armor that could withstand any energy weapon in the galaxy. Shields are useless, his tactical officer screamed. They're firing solid projectiles. Our barriers can't stop them. Return fire! All weapons! The Kethvar fleet responded with their own weapons, sending brilliant beams of coherent energy toward the human ships. The lasers and particle beams that had destroyed countless enemies struck human shields and armor designed specifically to absorb energy attacks. The human casualties were minimal. The Kethvar losses were catastrophic. Within the first 5 minutes of combat, 200 Kethvar ships were destroyed. Their energy weapons, while powerful, couldn't penetrate human defenses at long range. Meanwhile, human kinetic weapons continued to tear through their formations like bullets through paper. Sir, Rodriguez's tactical officer reported, enemy fleet is breaking formation. They're trying to close to energy weapon range. Let them come, Rodriguez replied coldly. All ships prepare fusion torpedoes. Fire when they reach optimal range. The surviving Kethvar ships charged forward, hoping to get close enough for their weapons to be effective. Admiral Zektar led the charge in his damaged flagship, scales bristling with rage and desperation. They managed to close the distance to 500,000 kilometers before the humans fired their second weapon system. Fusion torpedoes, each one carrying a small star's worth of destructive power, streaked across space toward the charging Kethvar fleet. Unlike the kinetic rounds, these weapons could be intercepted by point defense systems. But the Kethvar had never faced weapons like these either. Their point defense was designed to stop small missiles and fighter craft, not torpedoes the size of shuttlecraft carrying multi-megaton fusion warheads. The torpedoes detonated in brilliant flashes that briefly outshone the system's star. Entire Kethvar battleships vanished in the nuclear fire, their armor vaporized by temperatures that could melt planets. Impossible, Admiral Zektar whispered as he watched his fleet die around him. How can they build so many ships? How can they arm them with such weapons? He was discovering what many alien species would learn in the coming hours. Humanity didn't fight wars the way other civilizations did. They fought to win, quickly and completely, using every advantage they could gain. Sir, his communications officer called out, we're receiving surrender offers from several of our ships. Zektar's pride warred with his survival instinct. The Kethvar had never surrendered to an inferior species, but as he watched another squadron of his ships disappear under human fire, he realized that humanity was far from inferior. Open a channel to the human fleet, he ordered. Rodriguez's image appeared on his screen, showing a human female in military uniform. Her expression was cold as winter space, and her eyes held no mercy. This is Captain Elena. Rodriguez of the human fleet, you have 30 seconds to surrender all remaining vessels, unconditionally. I am Admiral Zektar of the Kethvar hegemony, he replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. I demand to know by what authority you attack our territory. By the authority of 2.3 million murdered humans, Rodriguez answered. You have 20 seconds. Zektar realized with shock that the human wasn't interested in negotiation or diplomacy. She wasn't going to explain humanity's superior firepower or gloat about their victory. She simply wanted his surrender or his destruction, and she didn't care which. We surrender. All ships stand down weapons and prepare to be boarded. Understood. You will be treated according to the laws of war, which is more consideration than your people showed the colonists at New Eden. Similar scenes played out across 17 star systems as the human armada struck simultaneously. Battle groups 1 through 6 engaged Kethvar fleets at their own targets, achieving the same devastating results. At the Kethvar homeworld of Keth Prime, Admiral Steele led Battle Group 1 against the hegemony's main fleet. Nearly 3,000 enemy ships defended their most important world, supported by orbital defense platforms and planetary shield generators. The battle lasted 47 minutes. Human kinetic weapons smashed through the orbital defenses like meteors through glass. Fusion torpedoes cracked the planetary shields, allowing follow-up strikes to disable the generators. The Kethvar home fleet, larger and more advanced than any force they had ever assembled, was destroyed so completely that debris rained from the sky for days afterward. But the most shocking moment came when Admiral Steele opened communications. To the planet's surface, people of Keth Prime, his voice broadcast on all frequencies. This is Admiral Marcus Steele of the human space fleet. Your military forces have been destroyed. Your orbital defenses are gone. Your government's ability to project power beyond this system no longer exists. The planetary leaders, huddled in their underground command bunkers, listened in terrified silence. However, Steele continued, "We are not here to conquer your world or enslave your people. We are here to end your government's policy of genocide against peaceful species." On the planet's surface, millions of Kethvar civilians watched human ships fill their sky. They had been told that humans were weak, primitive beings who could be crushed easily. Instead, they saw weapons of unimaginable power held in check by beings who chose restraint when they could have chosen destruction. "Your military will be disbanded," Steele announced. "Your government will surrender unconditionally. Any attempt to rebuild your war machine will result in permanent occupation of your worlds." In the space of a single day, the Kethvar hegemony ceased to exist as a military power. 17 star systems fell to human forces in coordinated attacks that demonstrated a level of strategic, planning, and industrial capacity that shocked the entire galaxy. But the most terrifying aspect of humanity's victory wasn't their superior numbers or advanced weapons. It was their efficiency. Human forces didn't just defeat enemy fleets. They systematically dismantled the Kethvar's entire military infrastructure. Shipyards were destroyed or captured. Military academies were closed. Weapons factories were converted to civilian production or demolished entirely. Within 72 hours of the first attack, the Kethvar could no longer build warships, train military officers, or manufacture weapons. A civilization that had dominated this region of space for centuries was reduced to a collection of defenseless worlds dependent on human mercy for their continued existence. Across the galaxy, alien governments watched the reports with growing alarm. The species they had dismissed as newcomers, the humans who preferred trade to conquest, had just demonstrated military capabilities that dwarfed every other power in known space. The Veltar Collective, whose colonies had been destroyed by Kethvar raiders, sent messages of gratitude to Earth. The Zephyrian Alliance, longtime enemies of the hegemony, offered to negotiate formal treaties with humanity. But it was the message from the Galactic Council that revealed how completely the balance of power had shifted. The Council formally recognizes humanity's right to self-defense, their transmission began, and commends the restraint shown 3 months after the destruction of the Kethvar military. Admiral Steele stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Council in their grand chamber on the neutral world of Sanctuary. Behind him, holographic displays showed the current deployment of human forces across known space. The chamber was designed to impress visitors with its soaring architecture and artistic beauty. Representatives from 67 different species sat in carefully arranged sections, each delegation positioned according to ancient protocols that reflected their relative power and influence in galactic affairs. Today, those protocols meant nothing. "Honored delegates," Steele began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "I come before you not as a supplicant requesting permission, but as the representative of humanity's new galactic policy." The murmur that ran through the chamber was a mixture of fear, curiosity, and resentment. Many of these species had controlled galactic politics for millennia, making decisions that affected billions of lives across hundreds of worlds. They were not accustomed to being dictated to by newcomers. They were about to become very accustomed to it. "The Kethvar hegemony has ceased to exist as a military power," Steele continued. "Their remaining worlds are under human occupation. Their fleets have been destroyed, and their government has surrendered unconditionally. This operation required exactly 72 hours to complete." The holographic displays behind him showed the aftermath of humanity's assault. Former Kethvar worlds now flew human flags alongside local governments that had been reorganized under human supervision. The massive shipyards that once built instruments of conquest were being converted to produce peaceful vessels for exploration and trade. But the most telling image was the deployment map showing current human fleet positions. "As you can see," Steele said, gesturing to the display, "the 500,000 vessels of the human space fleet have not returned to Earth. Instead, they have established permanent patrol routes throughout this region of the galaxy." The Zephyrian delegate, a tall being with crystalline features, rose from his seat. "Admiral Steele, surely such a massive deployment is unnecessary now that the Kethvar threat has been eliminated." Steele turned to face the speaker, his expression neutral but his eyes cold as deep space. "The Kethvar threat was eliminated because we deployed overwhelming force. The patrol fleets ensure that no similar threat emerges from any other source." The implication was clear, even to species that preferred subtle diplomacy to direct confrontation. Humanity was not withdrawing its military forces. They were making it clear that the destruction of the Kethvar was not a one-time response to a specific threat, but the beginning of a new era in galactic politics. Furthermore, Steele continued, humanity is announcing a new doctrine that will govern our interactions with all species in this galaxy. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the translation system seemed to hum more quietly as every delegate strained to hear what came next. Any government, organization, or species that commits genocide against human colonies or civilians will face complete military annihilation. This is not a threat or a warning. It is a statement of fact. The Theran ambassador, representing one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations, stood with obvious distress. Admiral, such a doctrine represents a fundamental change in how interstellar law operates. The Galactic Council has established procedures for dealing with conflicts between species. The Galactic Council's procedures, Steele replied, resulted in economic sanctions against a government that had just murdered 2.3 million innocent people. Those procedures failed to provide justice or prevent further atrocities. He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. Humanity no longer recognizes the Council's authority to adjudicate crimes against our people. We will handle such matters ourselves, with whatever level of force proves necessary. The political implications sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates. For thousands of years, the Galactic Council had been the supreme authority for resolving disputes between species. Humanity was essentially declaring independence from the established order, backed by military might that exceeded anything the galaxy had ever seen. But Admiral, the Veltar representative interjected, surely you don't intend to police the entire galaxy? Such a responsibility would be beyond any single species. We have no interest in policing the galaxy, Steele answered. Most species are capable of coexisting peacefully without external supervision. Our concern is exclusively with those who choose genocide as a tool of policy. The distinction was important, and the more perceptive delegates understood it immediately. Humanity wasn't claiming the right to interfere in normal diplomatic disputes or territorial conflicts. They were specifically targeting the worst crimes, the complete destruction of entire populations for political or territorial gain. However, Steele continued, we recognize that our new role requires certain adjustments to existing arrangements. The holographic display changed to show shipping lanes and trade routes throughout human space and beyond. Effective immediately, all merchant vessels traveling through human-controlled systems must submit to inspection for weapons of mass destruction. Any ship carrying biological, chemical, or nuclear weapons capable of destroying planetary populations will be seized. Several delegates started to object, but Steele raised his hand for silence. This is not negotiable. The inspection process has been designed for minimal delay to legitimate commerce. Ships carrying only normal cargo will be processed quickly and without interference. However, any attempt to smuggle planet-killing weapons through human space will be treated as an act of war. The message was clear. Humanity was not just concerned with direct attacks on their colonies. They were taking steps to prevent any species from acquiring the tools needed for genocide. Regardless of their intended targets, Admiral, the Council's presiding officer asked, what assurance can you give that humanity will not abuse this new power? History shows that military supremacy often leads to oppression of weaker peoples. For the first time since beginning his speech, Steele smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. The assurance, honored delegate, lies in observing what we have already done. The Kethvar homeworld remains intact. Their civilian population has been harmed only to the extent necessary for military operations. Their local governments continue to function under human oversight. The holographic display showed scenes from occupied Kethvar worlds. Human soldiers worked alongside local police forces to maintain order. Civilian infrastructure was being rebuilt with human assistance. Schools and hospitals operated normally, with human doctors and teachers working beside their Kethvar counterparts. We could have glassed every Kethvar world the way they glassed New Eden, Steele said quietly. We chose not to. We could have enslaved their population or seized their resources. We chose not to. We could have banned their culture, suppressed their language, or destroyed their historical sites. We chose not to. The chamber was so quiet that the ventilation system seemed loud by comparison. Every delegate understood they were witnessing a pivotal moment in galactic history. Humanity's restraint is not a sign of weakness, Steele continued. It is a sign of our commitment to justice rather than revenge. But make no mistake, that restraint has limits. The display changed one final time, showing a star map of the entire galaxy with current fleet positions marked in blue. Human ships were distributed across dozens of systems, positioned to respond quickly to threats anywhere in known space. The 500,000 ships of the human space fleet will remain on active patrol indefinitely. Additional vessels are being constructed to replace any losses and expand coverage to previously undefended regions. By the end of this year, no corner of the galaxy will be more than 72 hours away from human intervention. Steele paused, letting the enormity of that statement sink in. 72 hours? In 3 days, humanity could bring overwhelming force to bear on any target in the galaxy. The age when genocide could be committed in remote systems, safe from retaliation, was over. In conclusion, Steele said, I invite any species that values peace and coexistence to continue normal relations with humanity. Our merchants will trade fairly, our diplomats will negotiate honestly, and our scientists will share knowledge freely. His voice hardened as he delivered the final words. But to any government that believes it can murder innocent civilians without consequence, I offer this advice: remember New Eden, remember the Kethvar, and choose very carefully whether you want to discover if humanity's mercy has limits. Steele turned and walked from the chamber, leaving behind a room full of delegates who were already composing urgent messages to their home governments. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted permanently, and everyone knew it. 6 months later, construction was completed on the New Eden Memorial Station. The massive structure orbited the dead world star at the exact coordinates where the colony had once thrived. Its halls contained the names and images of every person who had died in the Kethvar attack, along with historical displays showing what their world had been like before its destruction.